Hi, today we're going to have a conversation about a recent update that happened today regarding what's happening in the industry, where we had an event from BioAfrica hosting, having SAHPRA on with the Department of Science and Innovation and also the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. And the big breaking confirmation that came out of it today was SAHPRA basically confirming they had issued 26 licenses. We're reviewing 34 positive resolutions, pending license, and that they had obviously reviewed over 200 applicants to get to this stage. So that was really good to see in terms of the progress on the licensing front. But the event was fantastically hosted by BioAfrica. And I'd like to just also mention our panelists today. Prof. Matsabisa from the University of the Free State, the Department of Pharmacology. He was a great moderator. He did an excellent and outstanding job of really asking all the questions that was presented by attendees. He also didn't hold back on some of the hard-hitting questions as it related to things like the INCB limits and discussions on that. It was great to have Boitumelo, the CEO of SAHPRA, do a very strong closing remarks session in this engagement. We saw Dr. Chabalala from the Department of Science and Innovation discuss what is developing in the IKS, Indigenous Knowledge System space, and the partnerships he's chased up with universities and industry as a whole. And then we had Thabo Ramashala from the Department of Agriculture give us an update from the previous discussion they had on the National Cannabis Master Plan, which we had covered at the end of the month of March on the 30th. And then Daphney gave us an update on regulation, specifically on the licensing. And Ms. Omarjee did a great job of discussing the scheduling statuses that we are all pretty familiar about now. Ross, what was your view on the day's events?
Yeah, look, I think it was a fantastic discussion. The way the moderator handled things was fantastic. Yeah, just understanding where the industry is moving and how they want to actually progress in this industry is fantastic. I mean, they were chatting about how they wanted to start opening up certain divisions within the next 2 years, which is a step forward. I mean, when we jumped on a webinar the other day to discuss the 9 pillars of cannabis, I mean, they were basically saying that it was going to be a speaking, like an entry point to basically come together and understand where this industry is going to go. Now, obviously, with today's webinar, it cleared up a lot of the issues or underlying effects that could be happening within the cannabis industry. But I think they opened it up quite nicely. They made things a lot more clearer. And all to all, great webinar, great industry experts, and yeah, really looking forward to see what happens in the future with the progression.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, there was even iterations since the discussion about pretty much 3 weeks ago, where we had the National Cannabis Master Plan that we discussed about as well. It was a great event with participation, but they even had mention of a 10th pillar to add to the existing 9 pillars of the National Cannabis Master Plan regarding policy frameworks. And I think let's highlight the day's events, because it was also really nice that we had agriculture with SAHPRA in the same panel. We've seen this before once or twice in I'd call it a day's events, but not so much in a panel discussion. And it was good because it also facilitated that there wasn't the shifting of blame. And I don't think there was a lot of assignment of like, this is the responsibility of this department. It looked like both departments, including the Department of Science and Innovation, were all driving forward to ultimately facilitating the industry. And it's good. They mentioned as well how positive they felt the engagement was with industry. So we're really looking forward to just discussing the day's events. So let's jump into it. Obviously, Thabo gave an update in terms of Department of Agriculture. So that was, for me, we've discussed this before, the 9 pillars. So please feel free to go watch our discussion on this. We had a good 40-minute discussion on a near 4 or 5 hour discussion when it was hosted. For me, the big ones were just this emphasis on engaging with all the different departments, Agriculture, Department of Health, DTIC, Departments of Small Business, Department of Justice, DSI. I mean, you can see there for yourself. Also, the industry partners, ARC. It would have been great today, Ross, if the ARC was involved in this discussion. What's your views on that?
Yeah, look, it would have been great having them on. Maybe there was a reason that they couldn't be there, but I mean, in terms of the communication that happened on this webinar was phenomenal. I mean, we were throwing questions at SAHPRA, we were throwing questions at DALRRD, and the guys were actually coming back and answering. I think it's one of the first webinars we've actually been on with them where they've actually responded to what we've fast. And to me, that was phenomenal. It looks like they're communicating very well. They all know their functions as a whole. I mean, even when we were throwing the questions around, they were literally saying, right, this is what I handle. This is what Daphney handles. This is what DSI handles. So they really did a great job on this.
Yeah.
It was just nice to get so much clarity. I mean, it doesn't happen very often. So the fact that this was pulled together so well was really, it was like a weight off of your shoulders. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. Like I took a full opportunity, I suppose. I think I got into about 8 or 9 questions in, and there were so many I wanted to ask about. I mean, I wanted to ask about the scheduling of minor cannabinoids. How does that position stands within SAHPRA? There was a lot I still thought about asking, but you know what? I think they did a fantastic and outstanding job of entertaining industry questions and really trying to address it. And I will again say Prof. Matsabisa did a great job of asking those hard questions. So let's jump into basically since the previous discussions by agriculture, they continue to engage with industry, and please, I'll add it into the comments or in the description of this video, but continue to send requests and questions you have for agriculture to them. It's all supporting them to make a better informed decision about what stakeholders in the industry are trying to realize in terms of the National Cannabis Master Plan, which is focused on the realization of medical cannabis aspirations, hemp for agro-processing, as well as for industrial applications, and also recreational models in the future. For me, it was also nice to see DSI getting involved in terms of Dr. Chabalala. You know, there's always been this bit of a pushback, I suppose, from Western medicine on how to integrate indigenous knowledge systems with, you know, Westernized medicine. And I was really surprised to see how well the partnerships had been going with leading universities, the CSIR, South African MRC, or SAMRC. You know, it was quite nice, and also diversity. I mean, Ross, you can see there some of the topics that were covered. You know, it was quite encouraging how open-minded they were. I mean, if we talk about infused beverages, novel foods, those kind of, it was good to see. What were your views on this?
Yeah, look, I like to see that the industry is going to be moving in the right direction. I mean, this is a great starting point. I mean, you've got your traditional healers that can obviously start doing their herbal medicines. They were actually spoken about quite a bit in this webinar. Cosmeceuticals, so health and beauty, nutraceuticals, food and nutrition. I mean, that can even go into your sweet market. And then they also touch base on small business a lot. So obviously including entrepreneurship, which is great. I mean, this is the industry to start a lot of jobs. So yeah, it was just a great way to handle things and actually get across what they want to do. Their end goal is phenomenal.
Good, excellent. So yeah, I enjoyed that as well. And then we had SAHPRA come on. So Ms. Omarjee really spoke to the aspects of scheduling. Nothing really groundbreaking there. I mean, there was a discussion. I had some questions also regarding simple things like the question on the 20 milligram daily dose. Where was that drawn from? Which I was, you know, normally that's a question that you don't always get a clear answer on. I think generally, you know, it always helps, you know, why wasn't 40 milligrams per day chosen, or why specifically 20? I know I've seen 17 milligrams in certain jurisdictions. I think it kind of came back to a discussion that related to, you know, safety as a first consideration. It does obviously compromise possible efficacy of CBD, but ultimately, you know, based on the collective data they had reviewed at the time, they felt 20 milligrams was the way to go. At least they responded to that question, because for me, I kind of posed it as a question of 20. Why not 40? Why not more? But I think it's more leaning on the direction of safety first. And I'm sure that will evolve. But today's discussion really made me feel like there was an opportunity for the conversation to evolve more organically than previously experienced. I would have loved to ask about the minor cannabinoids as well, regarding scheduling, but you know, the coulda, shoulda, woulda. There is going to be another event similar to this. I anticipate Westgrow will be hosting this in on the 23rd or 22nd. 22nd. That's it. So yeah, Thursday this week. So if you see this before that event, be sure to look out for Westgrow's event, because it will be probably similar in nature. And I know we'll be there asking the questions we omitted or didn't get a chance to. Daphney, fantastic to provide an update since last year regarding the licenses. You know, the confirmation of 26 licenses issued, 34 positive resolutions. I know we've had 1 or 2 positive resolution discussions with guys, even one on the channel, where we had a review of their facility, had a look at all the considerations they had done for SAHPRA, for their audit, and also just the nature of, from 200 applicants, ultimately resulting in about 34 positive resolutions and 26 licenses. Anything that struck you in terms of you're definitely in the licensing space. What struck you? Anything out of the blue, or just a general positive sensation?
No, just general positive sensation. I mean, they really are grabbing the bull by the horns, and they're trying to get as many inspections done as possible. I can see that they're hitting the ground running, and this is pretty much the process that they do. I mean, you submit your application, they then review your application, they acknowledge your application, and then they start scheduling an inspection to obviously come out to site. Then they will eventually arrive on site, and then they'll issue their report. And hopefully, if your report's good, then obviously issue you a license. And then obviously you fall under the schedule. So THC being your Schedule 6 and CBD being your Schedule 4. Obviously, nothing's changed since May 2020. That was one thing that I thought they might have highlighted today quite a bit, was maybe looking at rescheduling the cannabinoids. But let's see, maybe it is their plan in the future. But in terms of licensing, this is pretty much bang on the money. This is exactly what happens. And Daphney covered that perfectly.
Great, yes. I mean, the one thing I do anticipate will come up next is I have a few clients that have gone through the process now of, process or extraction type of inspections in the full scope of GMP. And that's definitely a beast unto itself. That's where the regulators will probably feel the strongest in terms of expertise as it relates to extraction. That there was, we'll come to the topic of GACP and GMP for cultivation, I suppose, because that is it's a bit of a hot one, and I'm not going to jump too much into that right now. But I mean, this is a dense slide. But today, for me, their willingness to respond helped. I mean, I definitely had the same question I've probably voiced many times, which is, when will commercial hemp licenses and permits be allowed to go ahead? I think you agree with me, Ross. The main issue here seems to be the modifications of the Drug and Drug Trafficking Act and the involvement of the Department of Justice. Is that kind of in alignment with what agriculture keeps reiterating to?
Yeah, look, obviously, in the past where they had those hemp research permits, people obviously weren't sticking to it. So now they obviously need to employ the justice system, which is fair. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's a great strategy moving forward. I just wish that there was more answers regarding hemp, commercial hemp, and where it's going to be heading and if it's going to open up. I mean, it's a massive revenue stream globally, never mind just in South Africa.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I did add in the typical question I have on CBD isolate. I always have this view, which is outdoor grown hemp in the US that's derived to a dietary supplement to compete with those isolate price points is extremely challenging for any local economy. There's a whole discussion that did touch a bit, I think, on scoping in the future around taxation and supporting local industry. For me, it's a big one because, if it's managed, it's the CBD wellness and the medical products are completely separate in terms of the types of claims they can make, the type of scheduling that relates to it, and to ultimately apply a similar, you need to have GMP, but there are different interpretations in different jurisdictions regarding GMP, notably CFR 110 on food and 111 on dietary supplements compared to 210 and 211, which is pharmaceutical in the US pharmacopoeia. So I'm not going to hang on that. We've discussed this at ad nauseum in previous discussions. For me, this was the big one. And this is something I know we're probably going to talk about very soon, which is, how do local companies initiate seed registration? The involvement here from agriculture as well as the ARC. I've had the good fortune of dealing with the ARC in a webinar separately through another function. Things like, how can they assist local breeders with phytosanitary certificates, confirming feminization rates, ideally third-party certification. This is the second pillar of the National Cannabis Master Plan as it relates to seeds and input genetics. It's such a massive one. I know of companies like Felbridge, a licensed cultivator that works with 2 international sourcing agents, Pure Gene, as well as, I forget the other one, that's a Dutch company that supplies genetics into into the country. I know a lot of our discussions with cultivators, they have to keep sourcing their genetics internationally. And I think this is actually a super important point. I know you had questions on this as well. What are your views on how do we resolve the seed registration process and the certification around seeds? The CSRR, along with ARC, did a lot of great work here back in the day. Even Tony Budden, from an early point, there was a lot of involvement here, and I'm kind of feeling there's a stronger need to push on this point from a lobbying standpoint. Is how do we formalize this between the ARC, Department of Agriculture? I think they recognize the need for this to support local genetics. There's seed companies in the space as well focused on this. What were your views on the genetic input materials?
Look, obviously there's a catch here. So even though it's a seed, it still contains scheduled substances, which is your Schedule 6 and Schedule 4. So I understand that they need to regulate it correctly. So right now, I did pose the question, where can we get seeds from? Is there a local supplier? DALRRD came back and said, look, we are still working on a plan. As soon as that plan is updated, they will let me know. And then I did ask them in terms of medicinal cannabis, how do the guys get seeds? And obviously he said you can import from a license holder overseas. So that kind of answers that question. But then phytosanitary certificates come into that effect as well. So I think there needs to be a little bit more research done in terms of genetics. In terms of cloning, there's suitable guys in South Africa that have great genetics in terms of clones. So I don't understand why those guys can't supply the local license holders with cloning. But seeds I can understand.
Look, I think a lot. The Plant Breeders Act. There's a few other Plant Improvement Act as well. There's a few things that relate here, and correct me if I've used the wrong terminologies, but basically those acts that protect. There's a need for. So let's put it this way: if I'm a seed company and I invite guys to register their genetics, there's always the inherent risk, which is they'll start breeding from those genetics, they'll back pollinate, they'll go, there's always that inherent risk. It almost requires a very, almost an immediate sequencing of that genetics and following that up with like a WIPO patent or respective IP law. The guys in the IP space will go into the details. But for me, it's one of, I think we just need to keep formalizing. We need to almost have a third-party accreditation and unbiased things like the ARC biotech platform, maybe even one of the main seed companies that, there's always commercial interests, but how do we really get registered local genetics going, and how do we start sequencing that, and how do we optimize in that space? It's a big one. It's not going anywhere. The other question that I know I put forward, and I've done this in the past, and I'll continue and I will until I see what I want, is, what is the South African pesticide list for cannabis? Canada, California, Oregon have all published their pesticide lists. Consider revising and optimizing that. It would be foolish to consider that we would be using the same type of pesticides as these states and Canada as a country. There are certain pesticides that just haven't gotten into those regions due to the very strict control on pesticides. And for me, it's really important to see something like a white paper, a publication that basically comes from the regulator at this point. It is not really something that I would traditionally say is SAHPRA's job. It might be more agriculture, but between agriculture and SAHPRA, there needs to be a publication that relates to the South African pesticide testing list, because it will also facilitate local labs to know what to test for. It will also give an assurance to off-takers for the medical products that we can do at the moment until it changes. This is the most common pesticides in the country. This is what should be tested for. If we're doing additional tests for pesticides, we're happy to obviously go for a pick list, like a Californian list or Canadian list, and add on to that. But we should at least have our own interpretation on risk that is presented from pesticides. I didn't get a very clear answer on this one, but I do know that Boitumelo did mention that there was a lot of engagement and questions that they kind of took note of, that they are looking to consolidate. And the same thing here related to the question around the cannabis monographs, specifically, how quality for flower and inflorescence is reviewed. I know we've done this on the channel as well in the past as it relates to the Dutch monograph more specifically, but there's also the German monograph. So I think this is really important. And I think it would be great to even see a South African monograph for cannabis quality considerations. So fingers crossed. I mean, that would kind of put us on alignment, I feel, with a lot of the international developments. I think this is the big challenge. The one thing that came out of it was Daphney mentioned that of those 26 licenses, essentially 10 had really initiated cultivation activities, and only, I think, 3 of those companies had really focused on exportation exposure. That should fit with, obviously, your experience with the cultivators.
Yeah, it sounds pretty accurate to my knowledge. So, yeah, I mean, there was a thing there that you touched there with quality in terms of your monographs. So obviously SAHPRA's way of thinking is obviously quality, safety, efficacy. So look, in terms of testing, I mean, you're even speaking about the pesticides. So I think in America, they've got over 400 different pesticides they test for as well. In South Africa, I think we've only got a list of about 40. But this all falls into the monograph. So, I mean, it would be nice if South Africa did release a monograph. And this would also tie into good laboratory practice. I mean, I know you posed this question, which was how many GLP labs are currently approved in South Africa for performing cannabinoid-related testing, and is SANIS developing proficiency testing for cannabis? I mean, this would be more your background. So, yeah, what's your input there?
Yeah, look, I try not to stretch myself too much from seed input genetics through ISO standards and GLP, but I mean, from the website from SAHPRA, there's 14 let's call it SAHPRA accredited labs. We'll leave the discussion on GLP off. I know that there are 1 or 2 that possibly aren't on that list. I can think of NAFs that recently received SAHPRA accreditation. I didn't, so I'm not going to go into that too heavily. But of those 14 SAHPRA listed testing labs, which of those participate in cannabinoid testing, and to what extent? Are they doing heavy metals using ICP? Are they going into pesticides, some of them? Are they only willing to have a look at potency? Remember, you always need a permit for every cannabinoid if you're doing reference standards coming into the country. This is one where we need permits for that every time. And, as a reference standard and validating the method, it needs to make commercial sense. And I think this also relates a bit to the question I had on post-importation testing of products, especially CBD wellness products. Is there a reference laboratory? I know there is a reference laboratory for obviously the biologicals coming into the country, but who is the reference laboratory for SAHPRA on cannabinoid testing? Is that in place? Can they agree upon it? Can the public start using them? Because I think this came up from a few of the individuals on the chat. I remember I saw a question by Keon as well from Druid's Garden. There's a struggle around testing locally in terms of getting consistency of results. And I mean, this relates back to proficiency testing. I know that there was mention made of how to include SANAS and SAHPRA in supporting the testing space. And I'll be a big proponent of, if there is any form of taxation that's applied to aspects of, protectionism of a local economy, it should definitely be used. The revenue should not go to, political interests. It should go to subsidizing the cost of testing. And I think if we subsidize the cost of testing, it's going to improve the quality, not just of medical products, but the future of fast-moving consumer goods. And definitely in the CBD wellness space, it's expensive to do testing. And I think it would be fantastic to see any kind of taxation, if we were to call it that, if it is implemented like it is in states like in the US, to see it support the testing industry, because ultimately that supports all the points in terms of safety, efficacy, and also the objectives of agriculture and all the Department of Health and the rest. So, I'm quite adamant that there just needs to be more clarity in this space. I think what else really stood out from you in terms of questions on your side?
Look, the seeds was a big thing. There were quite a few guys asking about the seed importation, but we will do another webinar based on seeds. That way you guys can get more of an indication. I think quality was brought up quite a bit, risk. So obviously, look, to maximize quality, we obviously need better testing, and then obviously we need to mitigate the risk factor as well. Yeah, so that's where your risk management comes into place.
There was a question as well that was done on the INCB limits, which was, normally the question that, so well done to Prof Matsabisa for asking. There were 2 or 3 questions that related to the INCB limits. For those who don't know, it's the International Narcotic Control Board. That the UN, obviously, there's an engagement between a medical regulator or any country, and this relates back to the convention on. I'm not going to go into all the conventions from the UN, but essentially it goes into a simple principle, which is as long as it's defined as a narcotic substance internationally across the world. Why is it? And this was a great question. Why is it Canada essentially didn't? Why is it Canada? I wouldn't say doesn't regard the standard, or they are signatory of the UN, but they don't really bend to the will of the INCB when it comes to enforcing that restriction. And I think, I'm going to say that loosely because, they are obviously working with them. But it was great to see the example, and Daphney provided this, how Canada had provided a lot of resources, a lot of research on basically that question on the INCB, and basically had lobbied the INCB that we're going to do what we want to do. And it's similar to how a lot of these states in the US, and I'm not sure how the states handle this in terms of the US, as a federally it's still illegal. So how do they lobby the INCB? But we do know that THC is not supposed to be coming in or out of the US, or even across certain state lines there. So it's one where, that we won't comment on. There's a plethora of individuals on YouTube, on Google, that can comment on this alone. It was just great to see how willing everyone was to deal with questions. So I'm definitely looking forward to the next event in basically 2 days from our side, on the 22nd, hosted by Westcrow. And we expect a similar type of panel.
Yeah, it should be the same sort of panel from what I've seen. I shouldn't think of anything else changing there. Let's hope they've got a little bit more information for us, and hopefully we can pose a few more questions to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you do see this chat before that, join the Westcrow event. I know I've circulated the information. It's available, I believe, on the website as well. So ultimately, I look forward to the engagement. I look forward to the ability to engage. And it feels to me that hopefully this is the year that things start picking up in the manner. And based on 26 licenses, things on the medical side are moving. And hopefully more than 3 will be exporting flower appropriately. But let's look forward to what happens over the course of 2021. And the struggle continues to formalize the sector. Ultimately, formalizing the sector on medical facilitates the CBD wellness space, as well as any future recreational markets in the world that's coming. So, I'm just passionate about it, and I know you are as well, Ross. So thank you if you've watched it to the end, we appreciate it. And what we'll continue to do is hunt for questions and answers. The quality of the question obviously dictates the quality of the answer. So, knowing what the right questions are is almost the start of it. But I'm looking forward to having you back, Ross, on the discussion when it relates to seeds, genetic input material, clones. That's a topic that I feel needs more attention. And it's not that easy to find all the requirements around phytosanitary certificates, feminization rates, but it is an important topic. So, Ross, thank you once again, and it was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, and happy 420. But guys, if you guys want us to answer certain questions, please drop Jeff an email. Let's see what information we can find out for you guys. Obviously, your input allows us to give you a better output.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Perfect. And I know we always answer our phones if we can, if we're not in meetings. So appreciate your attendance, everyone, and let's continue to create great content to inform the sector and formalize it.